of timber in Rapa Nui. First, let's have a look at Rapa Nui's territory. Rapa Nui is a small island. It is located 3,500 kilometers west from Chilean coast, which makes it an isolated place. It can also be accessed only by the sea or by air. In red here, you can see where the settlements are, where people live, which is where resources are used and consumed, in particular here, timber. The island is also characterized by a strong erosion that you can see on this map in many places. And it is linked to the scarcity of resources that the island represents. For wood, for example, there's only a eucalyptus plantation that is left unmanaged in the middle of the island. Now I'm going to present you the building fabric of the island. So Rapa Nui's building fabric is heterogeneous. It is characterized by three main periods. So on the left, we have the ancestral boathouse. In the middle, top left. In the middle, the colonial house, an example of. And on the top right, post-colonial, which are recent developments of the fabric. On the lower part of this image, you can see on the left and on the right two houses, which are characterized from different inputs. So Rapa Nui people build with either what they find or what they can get on the island. The scarcity of what they can get or find implies that they deal with an economy of means in some aspects, but in others, you can see, for example, on the right very well, the animism input, which implies a use that to us appear irrational, a use of wood that to us appear irrational. From these photographs, we can notice the importance of timber in the building fabric in Rapa Nui. There are only two ways of procurement for two products in Rapa Nui. So the first product is wood, raw wood, that they can find on the island. So basically what they do, they go to the forest and either they take fallen trees and bring them back with their cars to their construction site, or they can also saw the tree, the living trees. The rest of the timber that is used in construction is, of course, imported because there is no industry on the island. So the subject of my research is the exploration of the reasons for the current uses of wood in the building stock of Rapa Nui, and consider alternative uses and ways to introduce them. But why is this research needed? Why is this topic important? It's because today, Rapa Nui's building fabric presents inefficiency in the use of resources. And this inefficiency is facilitated by cultural inclination and socio-economic dynamics. In the end, this is harming the territory. So here is a typical example of housing. And as you can see, it's only 18 months since completion. So we understand the kind of building stock that is produced on the place and the impact it has on the island. Therefore, my research goal is to facilitate the creation of a new tradition. But why would I want to do this? Because although isolated, Rapa Nui is not alone. There is a pervasiveness of its model across the world. The most transitioning, urbanizing, and remote places where we can observe a contemporary vernacular. This pervasiveness of one phenomenon enables the definition of an ideal typical approach to the problem. as Rapa Nui makes an ideal type for case study. And I'm going to explain you why. So Rapa Nui represents a limited ecosystem where we can easily assess what comes in and comes out. It's a landmass delimited by the sea that creates this ecosystem where people and materials come in and out. Its isolation simplifies the system of relations that are acting on it. Hence a reference to Robinson Crusoe using his imported axe to cut a tree that grew on an island to produce something. So how to define an ideal typical approach to the problem? I will focus analytically on 3 elements. The first one is building typology. The second one is the material supply chain. And the third one are the cultural mores. To do this, I'm going to collect data via different methods: physical survey, industry records, and literature review, as well as interviews for the 3 data collections. Then I will investigate the relations between the 3 domains, questioning which factors to retain and which factors to modify, which is shown in this diagram. So I'm going to look at the reasons why that are embedded by culture and economics, and what is produced, which is the building stock production through the industry. What will this research produce in the end? The idea is to arrive at a catalog of elements utilized in the building stock production, as well as an inventory of types and procurement processes. Regarding procurement processes, this research will also question if timber and wood can be produced within the island, or if Rapa Nui should still import these materials. What will be the outcome of this investigation methods? It will be compiled into a policy draft for resources management, territorial development, and local building identity. To investigate the material supply chains, the research will also require a knowledge building phases about timber and wood through field visits with experts. So here is an overview of the knowledge building phases, with the first phase, which was initial fieldwork I undertook on Rapa Nui in November 2022, and expected upcoming stages at several laboratories around the world that are experts in their domains. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and we give room now to discussants for comments and questions.
Thank you very much. That's an exciting talk. I have 2 questions. The first one is related to the social and symbolic aspect of timber, which in this close community, as you say, it's an island, it's a kind of self-sufficient ecosystem, so to say, and the material is brilliant, and of course it's kind of natural that it has been used traditionally for buildings, but precisely because it's very present in the culture, it's also symbolically important. So how do you capture this symbolic or social aspect of timber in the local community? As in the policy document that you mentioned, you also plan to look at identity and the local identity, how this the use of this material also has an impact on local identity. And my second point is, I liked the way you presented the case study as something that also could be connected to many other places, because we all suffer from the loss of natural resources at different levels. So so to say, findings from this thesis could be transported and could be relevant to many other cases around the world, but at the same time, it's a closed ecosystem. I come back to your definition. And there's some also limitations of how some of these results and findings could be transported and could be translated into other contexts. Can you talk a little bit more about the limitations as well?
Yes, thank you for your questions. First, the precision, because you mentioned self-sufficient. Today, Rapa Nui is far from being self-sufficient. Everything is imported, therefore very expensive and of low quality. That's why we end up with low quality buildings that don't last and that are not suited to the place, that require maintenance or rebuilding, reparations. So this is one of the reasons why the research is needed. It's not self-sufficient today. I don't know if it will ever be. This is one of the questions that is asked by the research as well. Regarding the cultural aspects, so I had the chance to go there and talk to the people. So there is, of course, this anthropological part that I have to take in account. And other fieldworks are scheduled to go there to further this research. And also literature is very abundant regarding anthropological and archaeological aspects of Rapa Nui. Not architectural and constructive aspects. There is no literature on this almost. But regarding anthropological, cultural aspects, it's abundant. So this will be my primary sources. And your last question was about the replicability of the system. So maybe I was not clear when I said the goal is to produce a policy draft, but the idea is not to replicate the policy to other places, but more the method. So the way to assess the context and how to provide recommendations. So of course, we can take the results from Rapa Nui and apply it everywhere because every condition is different and localized. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you for the research presentation. First of all, I very much appreciate how methodological you are and how very, very clear you've laid out, what is the goal? What are the questions? Why are we doing this? How am I going to do it? Where am I going to end up? It's to some point, almost, one could say almost too closed up. You're like, okay, already have everything set up. But it's a good, I mean, I mean it as a compliment in the first place. It's good to still leave some questions open, or at least you yourself be aware that things don't just follow that plan. But obviously, as you will do the work and the field work, you'll come up with other questions. But that's very, very nice to see. I had a similar question around the larger picture of the research. So because you're focusing on this very specific case study, which you've outlined why we need the research, but indeed the potential to transfer it to other cases. I'm wondering if the way you see it is as you will learn certain methods that work and don't work, and then you can apply it to similar cases, to other isolated closed off areas or societies, or depending what you look at. Or do you see a value in your research that could be applicable to completely different societies, to places that are not cut off or just as independent, or I'm lacking on the right words, but you know what I mean. Okay. It can be one or the other. I'm just curious how you see it.
For the moment, I see it for similar places, which are, let me get back to the slide because this will support my answer as well. Where is it? So I'm talking here about pressure that places that are under a certain pressure, and it can be growth, urbanization. In the case of Rapa Nui, there is tourism, which is also causing much pressure on the territory because there are many people coming there to visit their incredible heritage. So for the moment, the idea is to go with similar places. Let's see if during the process, I find out methods that can be applied to other territories that maybe present different characteristics. And yeah, the first part of your question was about the methods. I mean, you mentioned the methods. So yeah, it's joining what I answered earlier, that it's more about the result and providing a universal answer that doesn't exist.
Yeah. I have one more question about the policy making, your desired output to basically have a policy suggestion is, how is policy being made right now in Rapa Nui? What are the systems in place? How realistic do you think that a policy coming from the outside would even be useful or not?
This is an excellent question because Rapa Nui is a particular place also politically because it depends from Chile, but it has its own identity, and Rapa Nui people don't define themselves as Chilean but as Rapa Nui. There are political tensions within the island and also in relation with larger entities, larger Chilean entities. So in order to provide results that are effective and that can support them locally and efficiently, we have to work with them. That's why I'm going there, talking to the people, and the idea is that I learn from the people I meet and not that I'm telling them how to do things. So it would be more suggestion. Maybe policy is a strong word, but
yeah. No, it's, thanks a lot. I think that's an important part. Also, when you talk about your methodology and what you're going to do to, it's not presented as, I will see what's going on, I'll come up with these solution suggestions, and then I'll make a policy. But this interactive part where you obviously
it's
have
a
to learn
dialogue.
and figure out what could be done, and basically to position it, whether it's purely speculative as an outsider looking at it, in which case I'm not sure that's what you'd want to do in a PhD, or please make that point strong.
The idea is to be able to support them in a way that's in line with their cultural values and what's important to them. So
I think that I mean, and I know you're in your first year, so it's
yes.
But I think that in terms of your methodology, that can be detailed out a lot more.
Okay.
How you expect to interact, learn, what do you expect to learn? How would you use that information? You know, how would you get to that policy?
Okay. Thanks for the input.
Thanks for the nice presentation. I have actually a question. If you can just clarify a bit what's the context, because you touch upon tourism and so on. But I was wondering, because it's very interesting that an island is a closed system, so in a sense you can quantify input, output, and it's very interesting to see if it can be self-sufficient or not. You're looking at this mostly from the building perspective. So is it because there is a population growth? It's mostly tourism. So what is driving basically this demand? And what is the climate? Do you have a climate where you can have timber production or not? Because that can tell you, right, if you can or cannot sustain the food production, things like that. What is the context and the problems and the issues? Basically, I'm just curious.
Sure. So there are many elements to answer your question, but first to present a bit the island. The climate is subtropical, so things that grow really well. The problem is that because of erosion that you can see occurs pretty much everywhere on the island. I mean, the places it doesn't occur is just because they are flat, but there are many volcanoes and little mounts on the island. So erosion is a very strong phenomena. And today there is an organism called CONAF that manages the forests. I mean, the forest, there's only the old eucalyptus plantation. So that's something that was planted to produce fuel, but in the end it wasn't not used and it was left unmanaged. So they're trying to plant trees everywhere they can to try to rebuild the soil for the grass to grow, to slow down erosion. But there is wind, there is rain, and there are animals wandering freely all over the islands, So there are horses, cows, chickens, and dogs, and they go everywhere. They can climb on the moais if they want. They go everywhere, and they do a lot of damage to the island. So for the moment, things don't grow much because of this lack of soil. And the island is really trying to get the soil back to be able to plant and grow. Another thing about how things grow on the island, during COVID, they were completely closed. So for 3 years, they had no one coming in, but they also had no planes or only few and no boats. So that meant they had to, in some way, be self-sufficient. And they started to think, oh, but maybe we can plant our food and do not depend on the planes to get it. So agriculture is slowly getting back onto the island, but it takes time because people there are not used to cultivate things because they are used to the things coming to them via planes or boats. So that is it for the physical aspects of the islands. And for the drivers, the main drivers so far, so there is the population growth. I don't know the rate, but yeah, the population is growing. There are, in 2023, there are 8,600 inhabitants. And 5 years ago, I think it was 7,000 something. So it's growing. But also tourism is a big pressure. Like it's, before COVID, it was 120,000 visitors per year. So that's causing a huge pressure on the island because these people need energy, food, water, I mean, everything, and everything is scarce there. So yeah, this is what I'm thinking about for the moment.
No, it's okay. Okay, next time. I just had a quick question,
Yes.
which I thought of when you were describing the agricultural system. So I can imagine that for the last 50 or 100 years, things have been being flown in or boated in.
Yes.
Was there any history of agriculture or has there never been any history of agriculture on the island?
No, there has been. So the island has first been colonized between the 6th and 8th century. And up to, I have the dates here, up to the mid-19th century, it only grew. And there was agriculture at the time. But then overpopulation, because there were 14,000 inhabitants at some point. Yeah, they had a situation of overpopulation, and the tribes started fighting each other for power and influence. And also, I mean, there are many theories about how Rapa Nui came out of resources. Some say it's because of the moai, some say it's because of the civil war, some say it's because of diseases that came in, or of rats that ate the seeds faster than they could reproduce. So far, it's not clear, but from mid-18th century, everything has declined. Resources, population, and there are successive periods of history where colons came to the island and took Rapa Nui as slaves to Peru, for example, and brought in diseases that killed the population. So there is a history of agriculture, but it has been kind of forgotten because they just had to survive at some point. At the lowest point, there were 111 people, and this was in 1877. So when you are from 14,000 to 111 people, you see that your needs are only your survival needs. They lost their writing, so they have ancestral writings they can't read anymore because the people died, the people who had this knowledge. So they had knowledge, but somehow it was lost in the process. You're welcome.
I have a question.
Yes.
Well, just a comment. I think this last answer was actually really fascinating, and I think it would be like really nice to see in the presentations as well.
Okay.
It's as if like the history actually
Kind of a timeline.
sort of answers some questions. Yeah. So
Okay, thanks for the suggestion.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on what you said, the anthropological accounts and the interest of anthropologists in this very specific culture. Now it's really getting interesting, as you say.
Yes.
The context and the history of the island and how cultural and natural aspects are kind of entangled in a very interesting way on a very small surface. So it makes it even more interesting.
Yeah.
So in what I understood, you're planning to use the anthropological literature as secondary sources, right?
Yes.
And to see if anthropologists trace some of those connections, the connections of local people to nature, and in particular timber. Yeah,
Yes.
If they talk about those resources and how they talk about these resources, if they talk about construction methods and how exactly these construction methods are part of the overall culture, but maybe rituals and very specific local understandings of nature. So this is more like a secondary resource for you, right?
Yeah.
If I understand
To support the main argument,
as a way to understand the local culture, but also as the way to understand the very specific place that timber has in this culture.
Exactly.
And therefore to understand construction methods. Yeah. The construction methods as well. But in your interviews with people, and builders and everyone you talk to, you could also ask them about this cultural aspect.
Yes.
This could be like different than relying on the anthropological accounts as a secondary sources that will inform your inquiry. But once you are there on the ground and you do follow people as they work with timber, or you interview them and try to understand this very specific connection to the material, but also the current situation, as you say, and how some of these traditional methods have been replaced with other methods. There, I think it could be quite interesting to explore this dual aspect of timber, not just the material aspect, the construction methods, so everything that is on the material objective side, but also the subjective, the symbolic, the social aspect, and what actually timber means today.
Exactly.
For them. Not for the tribes 3 centuries ago or 5 centuries ago, but what timber means for the daily practices of people living in contemporary situations, and to unpack this kind of meanings, both cultural and material.
Yeah, this is actually a point. When I say anthropology as a secondary source, I'm in literature, but the interviews, I already conducted some, and I asked a question about the cultural aspect, because I think we have a good example here. Oh no, it's the next slide. Sorry, I see it, but you don't. Yeah, now you do. So, for example, on the bottom left, maybe you don't see that well, but here is a log sculpted with faces that holds the roof. But I mean, we can understand this because this small house really embodies the subsistence and economic rationalism, right? Rationalism. However, this one is a much, let's say, higher class house. But they still use these trunks, and they are not even supportive, structural. So that means there is an importance for the owner of this house to display these huge raw logs on his house. And this has certainly to do with cultural aspects. On an island where there are no trees, or very few, having such huge raw logs on your house for not even a structural reason is a question that I find fascinating. And this is one of the reasons that initiated the research, yes.
What's the symbolic interpretation for that in the second picture?
So I couldn't meet this owner, so I couldn't ask him. And for the moment, I don't have the answer. Because when I ask the people, they say, oh, we like wood, but they don't go further. So I really have to first look at the literature to then ask them the questions, being informed.
Because this is like a trophy of an animal you have killed, yeah?
Yeah.
The trees you have killed to be able to build this house eventually.
Yes.
If the trees and the house are connected, but it's almost like it has this kind of trophy aspect. But maybe there's some kind of symbolic that is part of the mythology, and it's probably the anthropologists probably have the answer.
Yes.
But the owners of the house will tell you a different interpretation. That's super interesting.
Yeah, so I can balance the views. I mean,
Exactly.
there could be two inputs, like the one of the builder and the one of the anthropologist, and see if they meet or not.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Actually, if I can follow up on this quickly, what I find interesting actually the first picture, because what was the building material used before colonialism? So, because it looks like it was not wood, right?
No,
So it looks like more, with the colonialism, we have this idea, okay, we kill the trees, we have the profit, but maybe that's not actually the sustainable way forward, right? So maybe we should actually go back to something which is different to wood, right?
so
Do you have some, information on what was done before? And
yes. So on the top left, you have the image of the ancestral boathouse, and this was done with wood, but palm trees, which are more flexible. And so the way it's done, I have a bainga somewhere. So these elements, no. This element here, they were displayed on the floor, and the hole you see in, they were placing the poles in it to hold the bases, and then they covered it with palm. So that's how the first house you saw was made. But before colonialism, I mean, like I said, there was a period where they were just surviving. So they weren't even building houses, and this is a volcanic island, so there are many caves, and people were simply living in caves. So we also have evidence, evidence of ancestral houses that are made out of stone, but today they can't really, like there is one stone quarry on the island. I didn't identify it. Maybe I should draw it there. So there is one quarry here, but they are closing it in the next 2 years or something, because they realize we can't just take all the stone of our land, because our land is so small. If we continue doing this, we won't have land anymore. And also there is erosion. So yeah, rocks, stone, and then wood, and then imported materials.
Thank you, Chloé. Sorry, I think we're a bit running a bit out of
Oh,
time.
sorry.
No, it's okay.
Thank you very
for the
much.
presentation. Sorry.